Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound cutting through the murmurs of the gala, but Julian couldn't hear it over the roar of blood rushing in his ears. 3 years. It had been 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days since the love of his life had kissed him goodbye, promised to return by sunset, and then vanished off the face of the earth. Julian had searched morgues, hospitals, and police stations until his feet bled and his spirit broke, only to be told that Dorian Vane was gone. But there he was, alive, breathing, standing 10 feet away under the crystal chandelier of the Royal Opera House, looking more devastatingly handsome than ever in a midnight blue tuxedo. But he wasn't looking at Julian with the warmth that used to melt winter snow. He was looking through him with eyes of glacial indifference. And worse, clinging to Dorian's arm, possessing him with a smug, territorial smirk, was a delicate, silver-haired Omega wearing the Vane family crest. A ring that Julian had once been measured for. Julian's hand instinctively went to his flat stomach, a phantom reflex from a time when he carried a secret he never got to share. He took a step back, the shard of glass crunching under his heel. "Dorian?" The whisper tore from his throat, raw and desperate. Dorian stopped. The tall, broad-shouldered alpha turned his head slowly. Those eyes, the color of stormy seas, narrowed as they swept over Julian. There was no recognition, no spark, just the cold, imperious gaze of a stranger looking at a clumsy guest. "Do we know each other?" Dorian asked, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated through Julian's bones, waking up dormant ghosts. Beside him, the silver-haired Omega, Silas, laughed. A tinkling, cruel sound. "Oh, darling, don't mind him. Just another admirer who had too much to drink. Come, the press is waiting for our anniversary photos." Dorian nodded, dismissing Julian as if he were dust, and turned away. Julian stood frozen, the cruelty of the moment piercing him sharper than any blade. He wasn't just an ex-lover. He was the father of the child waiting for him at home, a child Dorian didn't know existed. The rain in Seattle was relentless, mirroring the gray bleakness of Julian's internal world. He sat in his small, cluttered studio apartment, the smell of turpentine and old canvas heavy in the air. He was a restoration artist, fixing the cracks in other people's masterpieces, while his own life remained a fractured ruin. In the corner of the room, a small boy with unruly black curls and eyes the exact shade of stormy seas played with a wooden block set. Leo. He was 2.5 years old, a genius for his age, and the splitting image of the man who had looked at Julian with zero recognition the night before. Julian's phone buzzed on the table. It was his agent, Martha. "Julian, listen to me before you say no," she started, her voice frantic. "I know you hate working directly with high-profile clients, but the Vane estate specifically requested the best restorationist in the city for their ancestral gallery. They're offering triple your usual rate." Triple, Julian. Think of Leo's tuition. Think of the debt. Julian gripped the phone, his knuckles turning white. The Vane estate? Does Dorian handle the hiring? The CEO? Heavens no. He's too busy running an empire and playing house with that trophy husband of his. You'll be dealing with the house staff and maybe the curator. Easy money. Please, Julian. Triple the rate. It would be enough to move them out of this drafty apartment. It would secure Leo's future. Julian looked at his son, who was currently building a tower with intense focus, a trait he inherited from his alpha father. "Fine," Julian whispered, feeling like he was signing a deal with the devil. "I'll take the job." The Vane Manor was a fortress of stone and glass, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was cold, imposing, and reeked of old money. When Julian arrived the following Monday, he made sure to wear scent blockers, strong ones. He couldn't risk his pheromones, which had once driven Dorian wild, betraying him now. To the world, he was a beta, a nobody. He was led to the East Wing, a long gallery filled with Renaissance portraits suffering from smoke damage. He set up his station, the rhythmic work of cleaning varnish soothing his nerves. He had been working for 4 hours when the heavy oak doors creaked open. Julian didn't turn, assuming it was a maid with tea. "They told me the air in here would be toxic with chemicals." A voice spoke from the doorway. Julian dropped his brush. He spun around. Dorian stood there, leaning against the frame, his tie loosened, looking exhausted. He wasn't the polished statue from the gala. He looked human, worn down. He sniffed the air, a frown marring his brow. "It smells like rain," Dorian murmured, stepping closer. "And burnt cedar." Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. That was his scent. Even through the blockers, under the stress, a hint must have leaked out. "It's the solvent, Mr. Vane," Julian said quickly, keeping his head bowed. "It has a cedar base." Dorian walked until he was standing right behind Julian's stool. The sheer presence of the alpha was overwhelming, a gravitational pull that made Julian's knees weak. "You were at the gala," Dorian stated, not asking. "The one who dropped the glass. I was clumsy. I apologize." "You called my name," Dorian pressed, his voice lowering. "You said it like you were in pain." "Why?" Julian squeezed his eyes shut. "I mistook you for someone else. Someone who died a long time ago." Dorian was silent for a long moment. "Died? I see." He moved to the side, picking up a rag and toying with it. "I was in an accident 3 years ago. A car crash in the Swiss Alps. I lost 6 months of memory. My family tells me I was traveling alone on business. But sometimes," he trailed off, looking at Julian with an intensity that burned. "Sometimes I feel like I wasn't alone." Julian's breath hitched. "The crash. That was why. It wasn't abandonment. It was tragedy. But the marriage?" "Your husband," Julian said, the word tasting like ash. "Silas. He must have been worried." Dorian's expression hardened. "Silas and I have been betrothed since childhood, apparently. We married shortly after my recovery. It was practical. A merger of families." "Practical," Julian echoed bitterly. "Why does that offend you?" Dorian stepped closer, invading Julian's personal space. He inhaled deeply, his eyes fluttering shut for a second before snapping open, dilated and dark. "Who are you? Why does my wolf pace in my chest when I'm near you?" "I'm just the painter," Julian whispered, terrified and exhilarated. "Liar," Dorian growled softly. He reached out, his large hand hovering over Julian's shoulder, trembling slightly. "Dorian!" The shrill voice shattered the moment. Silas stood in the doorway, his face twisted in ugly suspicion. He marched in, the scent of cloying synthetic roses flooding the room. "What are you doing here with the help?" Silas snapped, grabbing Dorian's arm and yanking him back. Dorian blinked, the trance breaking. He looked at his hand, then at Julian, confusion clouding his features again. "Checking the progress. The gallery must be ready for the auction." Silas glared at Julian with venomous eyes. "He looks incompetent. We should fire him." "He stays," Dorian said, his voice cold and authoritative. "His work is flawless." Dorian turned and left without looking back, but Silas lingered. He stepped up to Julian, his voice dropping to a hiss. "I know a desperate stray when I smell one. Stay away from my alpha. If I catch you looking at him again, I'll make sure you never hold a brush in this city again." Weeks passed. The torture was exquisite. Julian worked in the manor by day, enduring Dorian's confusing oscillation between cold distance and intense, magnetic curiosity. By night, he went home to Leo, hugging the boy tightly, whispering stories about a father who was a brave knight lost in a dark forest. The breaking point came on a stormy Tuesday. Leo's daycare closed early due to a power outage, and Julian had no choice. He couldn't leave the boy alone, and he couldn't afford to miss the deadline at the manor. He smuggled Leo in, setting him up in a hidden alcove of the library adjacent to the gallery with a tablet and headphones. "Stay here, Leo. Be as quiet as a mouse," Julian pleaded. "Okay, Papa," Leo whispered, his eyes wide. Julian went back to work, his nerves frayed. He was gilding a frame when he heard it. A crash from the library. Julian sprinted. He burst into the library to find a nightmare. Leo had climbed a ladder to reach a book and knocked over a heavy bust. He was on the floor, crying, holding his ankle. Standing over him, looking furious, was Silas. "You little rat!" Silas shrieked, raising his hand. "How dare you touch? Don't you touch him!" Julian roared, flinging himself between the Omega and his son. He shoved Silas back hard. Silas stumbled and fell onto a velvet sofa. He gasped, more in shock than pain. You assaulted me. Security. Dorian." The doors flew open. Dorian rushed in, followed by 2 guards. He took in the scene. Silas feigning injury on the couch, Julian kneeling on the floor shielding a sobbing child. "What is the meaning of this?" Dorian demanded, his voice thunderous. "He attacked me," Silas cried, squeezing out fake tears. "I found this street urchin stealing, and when I tried to stop him, the painter struck me." Dorian's eyes shifted to Julian. "Is this true? He was going to hit my son." Julian spat, clutching Leo to his chest. Leo buried his face in Julian's neck, his small shoulders shaking. Dorian froze. "Your son?" He walked forward slowly. The guards moved to intercept him, but he waved them off. He knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with Julian and the boy. "Let me see him," Dorian commanded softly. "No," Julian hissed. "Stay away from us." "Julian." It was the first time Dorian had used his name. It sounded like a prayer. "Let me see him." Slowly, Leo turned his head. He looked at the stranger with wet, stormy gray eyes. Eyes that were a mirror image of the man kneeling before him. The structure of the jaw, the shape of the nose, even the way Leo's brow furrowed in fear. It was undeniable. The air in the room shifted. The atmosphere grew heavy, charged with the immense pressure of an alpha realizing a fundamental truth. Dorian stared at the boy. A vein pulsed in his temple. He looked at Julian, then back at Leo. The fog in his mind, the wall that the accident had built, began to crack under the sheer force of biology and instinct. Dorian's voice shook. "He looks like me." Silas scrambled up from the couch. "Don't be ridiculous, Dorian. It's a coincidence. Look at the filth they're wearing. Throw them out." "Silence!" Dorian roared, the sound so powerful the windows rattled. Silas shrank back, terrified. Dorian reached out a hand. Leo, surprisingly, didn't pull away. He reached out his small, chubby hand and touched Dorian's face. "Dada," Leo whispered. The word was a key. Flash. A cabin in the woods. Flash. Julian laughing in the sunlight, wearing one of Dorian's shirts. Flash. Dorian's hand on Julian's stomach. Asterisk, if it's a boy, we'll name him Leo. Asterisk flash. The car skidding on ice. The last thought before the darkness. "I have to get back to them," Dorian gasped, clutching his head as the memories assaulted him. Violent, vivid, and undeniable. He fell forward, bracing himself on the floor, breathing heavily. "Dorian!" Julian reached out, concern overriding his anger. Dorian looked up. The ice was gone. The confusion was gone. In their place was a burning, agonizing clarity. And rage. Pure, unadulterated alpha rage. He stood up, towering over the room. He turned to Silas. "You knew," Dorian said, his voice deadly quiet. "My mother knew. You all knew." Silas was trembling now, his face pale. "Dorian, listen, it was for the family. You were in a coma. The doctor said you might never remember. We had to secure the legacy. You stole my life?" Dorian stepped forward, stalking Silas like a predator. "You stole my memories. You stole 3 years of my son's life. I am your husband," Silas shrieked. "You are nothing," Dorian snarled. He ripped the ring off his own finger and threw it at Silas's feet. "Get out. If you or any of the Vanes step foot on this property again, I will burn your entire legacy to the ground. Get out. Silas fled, sobbing, the guards stepping aside to let him pass, sensing the shift in power. The room went quiet, save for the sound of the rain against the glass. Dorian turned back to Julian. He looked broken, tears streaming down his face. He dropped to his knees again, ignoring the dignity of his station, and bowed his head until it touched the floor at Julian's feet. I'm sorry, Dorian choked out. I'm so sorry. I forgot you. I promised I never would, and I forgot you. Julian looked down at the man he had loved, the man he had mourned. The anger he had held onto for 3 years tried to hold its ground, but it crumbled under the weight of Dorian's grief. Julian slowly sank to the floor. He reached out and lifted Dorian's face. You're here now. Dorian surged forward, pulling Julian and Leo into a crushing embrace. He buried his face in Julian's neck, inhaling the scent of rain and cedar, finally grounding himself. He scented Leo, rubbing his cheek against the boy's hair, claiming him, marking him. I will never leave you again, Dorian swore against Julian's skin. I will spend the rest of my life earning your forgiveness. I will tear down the world if I have to, just to keep you safe. Julian rested his head on Dorian's shoulder, tears finally spilling over. The winter was over. The scandal rocked the city for months. The head of the Vane Corporation annulling his marriage, disowning his family, and publicly claiming a lowly restoration artist and his illegitimate son. The tabloids went wild. But inside the manor, now warm and filled with the sound of a child's laughter, the noise of the world didn't matter. Dorian kept his word. He was ruthless in business, destroying the relatives who had conspired to hide his memory. But at home, he was gentle. He spent hours watching Leo paint, hours holding Julian as if he might disappear if he let go. One evening, on the balcony overlooking the sea, Dorian wrapped his arms around Julian's waist. What are you thinking? Dorian asked, kissing the mating mark he had freshly placed on Julian's neck. A claim that no one could ever dispute again. Julian leaned back, watching the sunset. I'm thinking about the painting I'm working on. It was torn down the middle, separated for years. But now that it's put back together, the seam is stronger than the original canvas. Dorian tightened his hold. Gold, he whispered, like kintsugi. We are broken things repaired with gold. Julian turned in his arms and kissed him. A slow, deep kiss that tasted of forever. Yes, Julian smiled. We are. And that is how the Alpha reclaimed his heart, and how the memory of love proved stronger than the lies of an empire. If you enjoyed seeing Dorian burn his toxic family to the ground for his Omega, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments. If you were Julian, would you have forgiven Dorian? Or was the 3 years of silence too much to forgive? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.